Stage 1. The shape in the clay. I used to believe that knowledge was a kind of salvation, that if a man walked far enough into darkness with a steady hand and a clear mind, he would find, sooner or later, a lamp burning at the center of it. I was wrong. There are truths in this world that do not set men free. There are truths that look back. My grand-uncle, Professor George Gamble Angel, spent his life among dead languages and buried civilizations. He was the kind of man who could read meaning in a broken stone, who could hear the breath of vanished empires in a line of forgotten script. To the world, he was a scholar. To me, he was simply an old man who had lived too long among ruins. When he died, everyone called it natural. A weak heart, a steep street, an old body giving way beneath the ordinary weight of age. That was the story people preferred. People always prefer a story with walls around it. But his death came after a stranger brushed against him near the waterfront. A sailor, they said. Dark, foreign-looking, gone almost as soon as he appeared. No one thought it mattered. No one ever thinks the small thing matters until the whole shape of fate begins to show itself. I inherited my uncle's papers, boxes of them. Most were harmless, academic notes, translations, letters, the dry remains of a careful life. But among them was a locked box, and inside that box was the beginning of my ruin. It was only a piece of clay, a small rectangular tablet, crude and damp-looking, as if it had been shaped not by hands, but by something remembered through fever. At its base were marks that suggested writing, though they belonged to no language I knew. Above them crouched a figure. I can call it a monster, but that word is too kind. Monsters belong to childhood. They live under beds, in forests, in the moral order of fairy tales. This thing belonged to no such order. It had the head of an octopus, the wings of some obscene dragon, the body of something almost human, and therefore worse than animal. It did not seem imagined. It seemed recalled, as if the human hand that formed it had merely copied a shape already waiting behind the eyelids of mankind. Beside it lay my uncle's notes. At the top of the page, in careful block letters, he had written, "Cthulhu cult." There are moments when a word enters your life like a key entering a lock. You hear the click before you understand what has opened. The notes spoke of a young sculptor named Henry Anthony Wilcox, a fragile, gifted, nervous man, one of those souls too thinly separated from dreams, too easily reached by whatever moves in the dark beneath ordinary thought. In March of 1925, Wilcox had come to my uncle carrying that clay tablet. He said he had made it in his sleep. He spoke of a city, not a city built for men, a city of wet black stone and impossible towers, of blocks too vast for human labor, of angles that deceived the eye and sickened the mind. A city sunk in darkness, yet not dead. Beneath it, something waited. Something vast enough that even in sleep it pressed upon the thoughts of the living. Wilcox said there had been a voice, but not a voice as men understand voices. It was a pressure, a meaning, a command delivered without language. Still, he tried to shape it with human sounds. Cthulhu Fatah Gun. My uncle heard those words and changed. He did not react like a scholar encountering an interesting coincidence. He reacted like a man hearing footsteps in a house he thought was empty. From that day forward, he questioned Wilcox relentlessly. Every dream, every sound, every glimpse of those dripping walls and tightened stones. The young man returned again and again, each time carrying fragments of the same nightmare. Then, on March 23rd, Wilcox fell into fever. He cried out through the night. He spoke of a thing miles high, a thing that moved as mountains do not move, a thing that was not approaching the world, but remembering its ownership of it. Doctors found no proper illness. His temperature did not explain his condition. His body lay in bed, but his mind had gone somewhere older than sleep. Then, on April 2nd, it ended. He woke as if released. No memory. No explanation. No remaining dream. Only silence. But my uncle had not been idle. He had written to men and women across the world, asking them what they had dreamed during those same weeks. Ordinary people gave ordinary answers. Businessmen, clerks, sensible citizens, most had slept beneath the mercy of ignorance. But artists answered differently. Poets, painters, architects, those poor open windows of the species, they had dreamed of vast stones and black seas. They had heard half-formed syllables rising from below. Some had seen the outline of a colossal shape moving at the edge of vision. One man went mad. Another took his own life. Across the globe, newspapers spoke of panic, religious frenzy, riots, visions, and strange disturbances. London, India, Haiti, the Philippines, New York, Paris. Separate events scattered across the earth, but the dates gathered around one another like vultures. I did what any reasonable man would do. I refused to understand. There's a kind of courage in facing danger, but there's another kind of cowardice that disguises itself as reason. I told myself Wilcox was an eccentric. I told myself my uncle had grown old and suggestible. I told myself the world was full of coincidence. That is what we call sanity. The agreement not to look too long. But the clay thing remained, and beneath its crouching shape, something in me began to hear the first distant sound of a door opening under the sea. Stage 2. The Worshippers in the Dark. My uncle had seen that shape before, not in clay, in stone. 17 years earlier, at a meeting of the American Archaeological Society, a police inspector from New Orleans had arrived with an object he could not explain. His name was John Raymond LeGrasse. He was not a man of theories. He was not hunting myths. He had not come to speak of ancient gods or cosmic cycles. He had come because men had died in a swamp, and because the thing found among their killers did not belong to any known human history. It was an idol, small enough to hold, old enough to make every scholar in the room feel young. It bore the same monstrous form, the tentacled head, the wings, the claws, the squat and waiting posture. Along its base ran characters no expert could read. Its stone was greenish-black, flecked with strange light, unlike anything the geologists could name. The learned men passed it from hand to hand. One by one their confidence left them. That is how the ancient world returns, not with armies, not with trumpets, but in the silence of educated men who suddenly find their learning useless. Only one of them, Professor Webb, remembered something. Long before, in Greenland, he had encountered a remote and degraded cult among the ice. They worshipped an elder devil through rites of blood and terror. They kept a crude image, much like the one LeGrasse now carried, and they chanted words Webb had never forgotten, though he had prayed, perhaps, that the world might forget them for him. LeGrasse had heard the same words in Louisiana. 2 cults, 2 ends of the earth, no contact, no common language, the same idol, the same chant. Finglui maglua naf Cthulhu lie waganagul futagun. The prisoners had translated it. In his house at Arlee, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. There are sentences that do not seem written for human mouths. That was one of them. LeGrasse told the scholars what had happened in the swamp. It began with drums. Not the festive drums of men making music, but a deeper rhythm, monotonous and obscene, beating night after night from a region the local people feared to enter. Families had vanished. Women and children were missing. Screams came from the woods. Red light moved behind the trees. So 20 policemen went in. They crossed through cypress and black water, under moss that hung like the hair of drowned things. The deeper they went, the less the swamp seemed part of the natural world. There were stones where no settlement should have been, rotten walls, stagnant pools, trees twisted into shapes too suggestive of intention. Then they heard the chant. At first, it rose beneath the drums like wind passing through a graveyard. Then it became human, or almost human. Cthulhu raleigh, fotagun. They reached a clearing. At its center stood a monolith. Upon the monolith sat the idol. Around it burned a ring of fire. Around the fire danced nearly 100 worshippers. And around them, hanging from wooden frames, were the bodies of those who had disappeared. Some of Legrasse's men froze, one fainted, others cried out. But duty has its own madness. They charged. The clearing became gunfire, smoke, screaming, bodies, flame. When it was over, many worshippers were dead. Many had fled, and 47 were taken alive. But what they said afterward was worse than what they had done. They said mankind was not the first master of the earth. They said beings had come from the stars before man existed. Great old ones, vast, ancient, neither fully flesh nor spirit. They had built cities when the world was young. They had ruled before memory, before morality, before the fragile invention of human law. Then the stars changed. The great old ones could no longer move freely. Their cities sank beneath the Pacific, and their high priest Cthulhu lay sealed in Orlais, not dead, but dreaming. That was the word that troubled me most, dreaming. For dreams do not respect walls. They pass through stone, through water, through time, through the locked chambers of the sleeping mind. The cultists said Cthulhu spoke that way, not to all men, only to the sensitive, the fevered, the artistic, the mad, the ones whose minds were not fully guarded by the dull mercy of ordinary life. They said the cult had never died. It had hidden in deserts, ports, islands, mountains, swamps. It survived in whispers, in bloodlines, in sailors' oaths and midnight rites. Its members waited not for belief, but for astronomy. When the stars were right, Laia would rise. When Orlais rose, Cthulhu would wake. And when Cthulhu woke, mankind would discover that civilization had been nothing but a brief misunderstanding. No sin would remain sin. No law would remain law. The world would return to a freedom older than conscience. Men would scream, kill, revel, and worship beneath a sky that no longer pretended to be made for them. I read all this in my uncle's notes. Then I went searching for proof, because some doomed part of me still believed proof was different from punishment. I visited Wilcox. He was no liar. Strange, yes. Vain, perhaps, but not false. His dreams had passed through him like weather through an open window. I went to New Orleans. I spoke with Legrasse. I saw the idol. That was when skepticism ceased to comfort me. The thing was real, not symbolically real, not folklorically real. Real in the hard and silent way stone is real. And as I stood before it, I understood something that I had spent all my life avoiding. History is not a staircase rising toward enlightenment. It is a thin crust over an abyss, and sometimes from below, something knocks. By then, another thought had begun to form in me. My uncle had not died because he was old. He had died because he had listened too closely to the knocking. And now I was listening too. Stage 3. The city beneath the sea. The final truth did not come from a temple or a tomb or the mouth of a mad priest. It came from an old newspaper under a museum shelf. That is the cruelty of fate. It does not always arrive dressed as destiny. Sometimes it waits in dust. The paper was Australian, dated April 18th, 1925. A small article. A maritime mystery. A derelict yacht found at sea. One survivor. One dead man. A strange idol in the survivor's possession. His name was Gustav Johansen, a Norwegian sailor, a sober man. by all accounts. Practical. Plain. Not given to fantasy. The sort of man whose testimony becomes frightening precisely because he lacks the imagination to invent it. He had sailed aboard the Emma out of Auckland. A storm had driven the vessel far from its course. On March 22nd, they encountered another ship, the Alert, crewed by violent and strange-looking men. Those men ordered them to turn back. The captain refused. The Alert opened fire. The Emma sank. But not before her crew fought their way aboard the attacking vessel and killed every man upon it. Then came the decision that sealed them. Instead of turning back, Johansen and the survivors continued onward. Men often believe they choose their path. More often, they merely arrive at the place prepared for them. The next day they found land where no land should have been. An island, the papers called it, but it was not an island. It was the exposed crown of a drowned city. Relais had risen. Think of that. Not a legend, not a metaphor, not a nightmare brought on by fever. A city older than mankind had broken through the surface of the Pacific, wet and black beneath the sun. Its stones were vast beyond reason. Its walls were carved with images already known from dreams and idols. Its angles disobeyed the eye. Its geometry insulted the mind. One glance at that place, and all human architecture becomes temporary. All cathedrals, all prisons, all monuments to kings and nations, sandcastles before the returning tide. Johansen and his men climbed onto the stone. They must have felt it even then, that they had stepped outside the jurisdiction of God, if God had ever held jurisdiction there at all. The sun looked wrong. The horizon seemed uncertain. A surface that should have sloped one way appeared to slope another. Concave and convex exchanged meanings like conspirators. Then they found the door, a door large enough for a mountain. On it was carved the same figure, tentacles, wings, claws, the crouching, God shape repeated across the world by hands that had never met. The men pressed and climbed and searched along its edges, and then the stone began to move, slowly, softly, as if the weight of ages were no weight at all. A blackness came out, not shadow. Shadow is only the child of light. This was older. It poured from the opening like something that had waited too long in confinement. It seemed to darken the air, to stain the day, to bring with it the buried atmosphere of aeons no human lung was meant to taste. Then came the smell. Then came the sound. A wet, heavy, obscene movement from within. And then the god emerged. No language can hold what Johansen saw. Language was made for human-sized things, rooms, roads, faces, weather, grief. It was not made for a living mountain dragging itself from the tomb of a drowned star city. But Johansen tried. His words faltered. His handwriting nearly failed. Still, through the brokenness of his account, the shape rises, green, vast, gelatinous, winged, tentacled. A contradiction of matter and nightmare, a thing that should not have been able to exist, yet whose existence made everything else seem accidental. Cthulhu had awakened, not fully, perhaps, not forever, but enough for men across the world to dream, enough for Wilcox to burn with fever, enough for artists to see the city, enough for the mad to scream at the edge of revelation. The sailors ran. Some were taken at once. One vanished into an angle that should not have been there. Only Johansen and Bryden reached the yacht alive. Behind them, Cthulhu entered the sea. Imagine that pursuit. Not a beast chasing prey, not a demon chasing souls, but an age chasing the brief rebellion of the present. The ocean itself seemed to rise with him. His strokes hurled waves outward. His body moved through the water with the certainty of something returning to its rightful dominion. Dryden looked back and lost his mind. Johansen did not look back for long. He understood there would be no escape by speed. The yacht could not outrun what had slept through millions of years. So he did the one thing left to a man who has reached the end of fear. He turned the ship around. He drove it straight into the god. For one impossible instant, the bow struck that green immensity. There was a bursting, a stench, a cloud, a sound he refused to write. The thing came apart like matter, forgetting its own laws. But it did not die. That is the part a human story cannot accept. Heroes kill monsters. Sailors survive storms. Prisoners break walls. Light overcomes darkness. Those are human endings. This was not a human story. Behind the fleeing yacht, the scattered pieces of Cthulhu began to gather again. Slowly. Hatefully. Patiently. Johansen had not defeated him. He had only gained distance. Then came April 2nd. The storm rose, the city sank, the dreams ended. Wilcox woke, the world continued. That may be the most terrible part of all. The world continued. Men went to work, newspapers were folded and thrown away, ships entered harbors, professors returned to their lectures, lovers kissed, children slept, and beneath them all, Verlaine sank back into darkness. Civilization did not survive because it was strong. It survived because the stars moved out of alignment. I went to Oslo and found Johansen dead. Another ordinary death, they said. A falling bundle of papers. A sudden collapse. A weak heart. By then, I had learned what ordinary deaths can hide. His widow gave me his manuscript. He had written it in English, perhaps to spare her from understanding. That was the last kindness of a broken man. Now I have read it. Now I know, and knowledge, once admitted, does not leave. It sits beside you in silent rooms. It breathes in the dark when you wake at 3 in the morning. It stands behind every map of the world and whispers that the oceans are not empty. I know now that mankind is not the measure of creation. We are not the heirs of the earth. We are tenants, brief, loud, self-important tenants living above a sealed cellar, congratulating ourselves on the brightness of the rooms, while something older than history turns in its sleep below. One day, the stars will be right again. No prayer will delay them. No army will stop them. No science will explain them away. The stones will rise. The doors will open. The dreams will return. And somewhere beneath the black Pacific, in his house at Arlae, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. That is the mercy and the horror. He waits, not because he is weak, but because time belongs to him. I do not know how long I have left. Perhaps my end has already been arranged. A stranger in the street, a sudden fall, a doctor's convenient explanation, a death small enough to be believed. If so, let them call it natural. Human beings have always needed natural causes. They are the blankets we pull over ourselves when the universe looks in through the window. But if these pages remain, let them be a warning. Do not seek the final truth. Do not listen too closely to old chants. Do not compare the dreams of sensitive men. Do not study the idols brought from swamps, ice, and sea. Do not follow the trail of dead scholars and silent sailors. There are doors beneath the world, and some doors were not closed to protect what lies behind them. They were closed to protect us for one more night, for one more age, for one more fragile dream of being alone.